Picture this. It's the winter of 1010, after Christ, somewhere in the wind-scoured hills of Northumbria, and a woman named Aelfwyn is standing in the ruins of what used to be her hall, looking at the faces of 32 people who are going to die if she doesn't figure something out. Fast. Now, we think we understand cold. We complain when the heating breaks, right? We're uncomfortable when we have to scrape ice off the windshield. But this is a different kind of cold. This is the kind of cold that kills. The Vikings have been through here again, and they've done what Vikings do. They've burned the timber halls. They've taken the livestock. They've killed the men who fought back. And now Lady Aelfwyn is standing there with mostly women, some children, and exactly 0 viable options for surviving the next 3 months of English winter. She makes a decision that sounds insane on its face. They're going to go down, not just into a cellar. That wouldn't work. The Vikings know about cellars. No, she's looking at something else entirely, the remains of a Roman villa that's been slowly sinking back into the earth for 600 years. The Romans, those engineering geniuses, they built their heating systems under the floors. Hypocausts, they called them. Stone channels and chambers that once carried hot air to warm the rooms above. And Aelfwyn, standing in the frozen wreckage of everything she's ever known, has a thought that will echo through the centuries. If the Romans built spaces under the ground, maybe we can too. So they dig. And I want you to imagine this for a second, because this is where it gets real. These are women who've spent their lives spinning wool and managing households and raising children. Their hands aren't soft. Medieval life doesn't allow for soft hands, but they're not miners' hands either. They've got iron spades, which is something, but that's about it. No engineering plans, no architectural drawings, just desperate mothers with bleeding fingers, clawing through frozen soil because the alternative is watching their children freeze to death. The first night underground must have been absolutely terrifying. They've managed to clear out some of the old Roman chambers, shored up what they could with timber, created enough space for everyone to huddle together. The walls are pressing in around them in a way that walls above ground never do. The weight of the earth above them is palpable, almost alive. Every creak, every settling sound must have sent hearts racing. Is this the moment it all comes down? Is this where we get buried alive? And then, just before dawn, it happens. The entrance tunnel, the only way out, collapses. The sound, survivors will later say, was like thunder trapped underground. One moment there's a passage to the surface. The next moment there's just tons of earth and rock where the exit used to be. Now pause here for a second. Because this is the moment where everything could have ended. 33 people, trapped in absolute darkness. And when I say absolute, I mean the kind of dark that doesn't exist anymore in our lit-up world. The kind of dark where you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. Where the panic could take over in seconds and turn a group of rational humans into a screaming mob. But Aelfwyn doesn't let that happen. Instead, and this is the detail that makes me believe this story actually happened, she tells everyone to stop. Stop moving. Stop talking. Just stop. And listen. And in that absolute silence, they hear it. Air. Moving air. Coming from somewhere deeper in the structure. Warm air. Not hot. Not even particularly warm by our standards. But warmer than the killing cold outside. Coming from cracks in the stone, from passages they haven't explored yet, from somewhere in the Roman infrastructure that's been sitting here for 6 centuries, just waiting for someone to need it badly enough. That's when the decision gets made. Not just to survive down here temporarily, but to go deeper, to follow that warm air and see where it leads, to learn what the earth itself might teach them. And they learn fast. They have to. Within days, these women are reading geology like we might read a map. They figure out that where there's clay, the ceiling might collapse. Where there's limestone, the structure stays stable. They discover that underground streams don't just provide water, they're like signposts, showing where the ground has already settled, where it's safe to dig. The old Roman hypocaust channels become their classroom and their salvation. Those stone channels, built with mathematical precision by Roman engineers who've been dead for half a millennium, show them the principles they need. How to create airflow, how to manage moisture, how to support weight. The engineering principles they develop aren't written down. Most of these women can't read or write, but they're remembered. They're tested, they're refined. Always dig at a downward angle so water drains naturally learn. That one the hard way when a chamber floods and almost drowns someone. Create multiple exits to prevent entrapment. That lesson came from the collapsed entrance. And it's not one anyone needs to be taught twice. Position ventilation shafts to catch the prevailing winds. They figure this out by trial and error, by paying attention to which chambers stay breathable and which ones get stuffy. By the end of 3 months, what started as a panicked scramble into a hole in the ground has become something else entirely. It's an organized settlement, 20 feet below the Yorkshire moors, 60-some people living in a space they've carved with their own hands, following principles they've discovered through necessity and observation, and sheer bloody-minded determination not to die. And here's the thing that's going to matter. They don't keep this knowledge to themselves. The story spreads. Not through books or official channels. This is 10 after Christ. And women aren't exactly writing the chronicles. It spreads the way women's knowledge has always spread, through whispered conversations at market days, through songs sung while spinning wool, through the networks of mothers and daughters and sisters that connect communities in ways the official histories never capture. Because once you know that the earth itself can be a shelter, once you understand that going down might save your life when everything above ground is burning, well, that changes how you see the world, doesn't it? By 1050, just 40 years later, there are women from Scotland to Sicily who are looking at the ground differently. Not as something to build on top of, but as something that might embrace them, protect them, keep them safe when the world above gets too dangerous. The earth isn't a grave anymore. It's a womb, a sanctuary, a place where life continues, when life above ground becomes impossible. 3 distinct traditions emerge, each shaped by local geology and culture. In the north, they're building timber-reinforced tunnels designed for the high water tables of England and Scotland. On the continent, they're finding natural caves and expanding them with mathematical precision, using principles that, well, we'll get to where those principles come from. And in the Mediterranean, they're incorporating the ancient world catacombs, cisterns, all that Roman and Greek infrastructure that's been sitting empty, just waiting for someone to recognize its potential. And the economic logic? The economic logic is absolutely irresistible. Think about it this way. You spend one winter, one season of hard labor, and you create shelter that will last for generations. Meanwhile, every single building above ground needs constant repair, weather damage, war damage, time itself wearing away at timber and thatch and stone. But go deep enough underground, and time moves differently. The earth protects its own. So here's where we are by 1050 after Christ. What began with one desperate woman making an impossible choice in the frozen ruins of Northumbria has become something that's spreading across an entire continent. Women are teaching each other to read the earth like a text, to hear what the stone is saying, to understand the ancient engineering of civilizations long dead. But this is just the beginning, because what happens when women control spaces that men don't even know exist? What happens when knowledge networks develop in the dark, when economic power accumulates underground, when entire communities learn to disappear beneath the surface whenever danger comes calling? What happens when the earth itself becomes a kingdom, and women are its queens? So we left off with this question hanging in the air. What happens when women start controlling spaces that exist outside the normal social order? And the answer turns out to be a lot. More than you'd think, more than the historical record really captures. Because, and here's the thing, the people writing the chronicles weren't exactly paying attention to what women were doing in spaces they couldn't see. Between 1050 and 1250 after Christ, something remarkable happens. Those scattered experiments, those desperate improvisations by women trying not to freeze to death, they evolve into something sophisticated, into networks, into systems of knowledge and power that operate in parallel to the official medieval world, but largely invisible to it. And it starts with a woman named Mother Constance of Rheims. It's 1094. Rheims is under siege again, because this is medieval Europe, and sieges are basically the standard operating procedure for conflict resolution. The convent where Constance serves as abbess has 43 nuns, and they're trapped inside the city walls while an army camps outside waiting for everyone to starve. This is not a theoretical problem. People die in sieges all the time. It's just a matter of time and food supplies. But Mother Constance has been paying attention to the stories. She's heard about the underground shelters. She knows the city sits on top of Roman sewers that are still mostly intact, and she makes a decision that saves every single life under her care. They dig, not randomly, not frantically. Constance approaches this with the systematic mind of a scholar, which is what she is. She creates hidden chambers that connect to the Roman sewer system, which means they have access to water, to airflow, and critically to escape routes that the besieging army has no idea exist. The nuns can move supplies in and out. They can communicate with the outside world. They can outlast a siege that by all normal logic should have killed them. And then Constance does something that changes everything. She writes it down. Now, she can't exactly publish Mother Constance's Guide to Revolutionary Underground Architecture that completely undermines feudal power structures. That would be a quick trip to having some very awkward conversations with church authorities. So she gets creative. She creates what appears to be a book of prayers. Beautiful, illuminated manuscript. Exactly what you'd expect from a learned abbess. Except hidden in those illuminated letters are detailed engineering diagrams. Look at that capital O. That's not just decoration. That's the proper curve for a tunnel arch. The load-bearing structure that keeps tons of earth from crushing you. That downward stroke on the P, that's showing you the angle you need for drainage. The whole manuscript is a guerrilla engineering manual disguised as devotional literature. And it works. These manuscripts start circulating through convents across Europe. Abbey to abbey, convent to convent, passed along through networks that already exist for sharing liturgical texts and prayer books. Each abbess receives one adds her own discoveries in the margins. This technique works better in sandy soil. This modification improves airflow in deep chambers. This is what went wrong when we tried it. Don't make the same mistake. What you end up with is a distributed library. Multiple copies of accumulated knowledge, each one slightly different, each one containing the collective wisdom of dozens of women across hundreds of miles. If one manuscript gets lost or destroyed or confiscated, the knowledge survives in the others. It's decentralized information storage in the 11th century. But books can only do so much, especially when most people can't read. So the knowledge spreads another way too, through songs. And not just any songs. These are working songs, the kind women sing while they're spinning wool or churning butter or doing the repetitive labor that fills medieval life. Songs you can teach to a 10-year-old girl who will remember them for 70 years and teach them to her granddaughter. Songs that travel across borders and language barriers because melody sticks in the memory in ways that prose never does. The Badger's Bride becomes legendary. 17 verses, and every single verse contains crucial information about soil recognition. Where the oak roots deep and strong, there the ceiling lasts year long. That's teaching you that oak trees indicate stable, well-drained soil that's good for underground construction. Clay that clings to maiden's shoe warns of walls that won't stay true. That's identifying the clay soils that are prone to collapse when wet. The song spreads from Ireland to Poland. Women singing it don't necessarily know why these verses matter. They just know it's traditional. It's what you sing while working. It's what their mothers taught them. But when you need to dig a shelter in a hurry, suddenly those verses come back to you with new meaning. Suddenly you understand what your grandmother was really teaching you. The Feast of St. Barbara becomes the annual gathering. Barbara, patron saint of miners, and isn't that appropriate? On her feast day, women who build underground shelters gather to test their knowledge through riddling songs. Can you sing all 23 verses of The Depths of Winter's Home while maintaining perfect pitch in an echo-prone underground chamber? Because if you can, you're proving two things simultaneously. You know the construction principles encoded in those verses, and you understand acoustic engineering well enough to adjust your voice to the space. This is how you identify masters of the craft. This is how knowledge gets verified and transmitted. And it all happens hidden in plain sight, disguised as religious observance and folk tradition. But here's where it gets really interesting. These underground spaces start becoming centers of actual economic power. Prague, 1147. The Great Winter Market operates entirely underground. We're talking about 300 people conducting serious commercial business, 60 feet below the surface from November to March. Merchant women control the trade in furs, spices, preserved foods, all the high-value goods that make medieval commerce work. And controlling the space means controlling the trade. You want access to the winter market? You need to prove you understand underground architecture. You need to pass the knowledge tests administered by the women who manage the market. Can you calculate load-bearing requirements for different soil types? Can you identify dangerous excavation conditions? Can you maintain ventilation systems? The woman who designed the ventilation for Prague's market, Anna the Wise, they call her, she created a system that uses temperature differentials to create natural airflow. No mechanical pumps, no active management, just clever placement of shafts and chambers that makes the air circulate on its own, keeping 300 people comfortable in an enclosed space. That's genius-level engineering, and it happens in 1147, centuries before we supposedly discover these principles. The underground vaults beneath Cologne Cathedral tell a similar story. From 1100 to 1300, the Widows' Guild manages these spaces. They store enough grain to feed the entire city for 6 months. Think about what that means in terms of power. If you control the food supply, you control everything. The city authorities have to negotiate with you. The church has to negotiate with you. You have leverage. And who has access to this power? Women. Specifically, women who understand underground architecture and storage. But it's not just commerce. These underground spaces become intelligence networks. While lords are plotting in their tower rooms, their wives are gathering information in underground chambers, where acoustics are different, where conversations carry in unexpected ways, where wine flows and tongues loosen. People forget that sound travels through stone. Margaret of Flanders, they call her the Mole Queen. And oh, she earned that title. 1128, Ghent is under threat. Margaret orchestrates the defense, using an underground network that most of the city's military commanders don't even know exists. She moves messages through the tunnels. She moves supplies. She moves troops, for crying out loud, through passages that connect noble houses and merchant quarters and convents. Her map of underground Ghent, drawn on silk and hidden in an altar cloth, shows 73 interconnected chambers and 800 yards of tunnels. That's 3 generations of excavation work, 3 generations of women digging and building and connecting their spaces, creating this invisible infrastructure underneath the visible city. And when the siege comes, Margaret wins. She wins because she's fighting a 3-dimensional war while her enemies are thinking in 2 dimensions. They're watching the walls and the gates. She's moving her forces through spaces they don't know exist. The chronicles mention the defense of Ghent. They talk about Margaret's cleverness and courage, but they don't really explain how she did it, because the men writing the chronicles don't understand the underground networks. They can't see the infrastructure that makes her victory possible. So, by 1250, here's what we have. Networks of knowledge encoded in books and songs, underground markets that generate real economic power, intelligence systems that operate invisible to official authority, and a growing tradition of women who understand that the earth itself can be a source of power and protection. The scattered experiments have become a movement. The desperate improvisations have become sophisticated engineering, and it's about to reach its peak. Okay, so we've established that by 1250 after Christ, women have built these remarkable networks of underground knowledge and power. But you haven't seen anything yet, because what happens next between 1250 and 1350 is the Golden Age. This is when underground architecture transforms from survival strategy into genuine architectural achievement. And the crown jewel, the absolute masterpiece of this entire tradition, is the sunken palace of Heidelberg. Duchess Elizabeth of Bavaria starts construction in 1260. She's got resources, right? She's nobility. But more importantly, she's got vision, and she's assembled a team of 70 female engineers. 70. That's not a handful of women with shovels. That's an organized workforce of trained specialists, and by 1285, what they've built is staggering. 4 levels. The lowest chamber reaches 48 feet below the Rhine's high water mark. Let me put that in perspective. They're digging deep enough that they have to account for the water table of one of Europe's major rivers. That requires understanding hydrostatics, understanding geology, understanding structural engineering at a level that's supposed to be centuries away from being discovered. But here's what really gets me. The functional design. This isn't just impressive because it's big. It's impressive because every level serves a specific, well-planned purpose. Level 1. Winter markets and workshops. This is the public-facing level, relatively shallow, where commerce happens and craftspeople work during the cold months. Level 2. Living quarters for 300 people. Not cramped survival shelters living quarters. Chambers with proper ventilation, temperature control, spaces for families and private life. Level 3. Storage for food and trade goods. Climate controlled naturally by the depth and the stone, keeping things preserved better than anything above ground could manage. And Level 4. The legendary treasure vault, where Byzantine silk and Damascus steel are stored in conditions that preserve them perfectly for centuries. The engineering innovations happening during this period are absolutely wild. The breathing wall technique develops. Women figure out how to carve channels into rock faces that create convection currents. Warm air rises, cool air sinks, and if you position the channels correctly, you get natural air circulation through an entire underground complex. No fans, no pumps, just understanding how air moves and using that understanding to make comfortable, breathable spaces deep underground. The furnace systems they design are equally brilliant. There's one beneath Warwick Castle that legend claims could heat 12 chambers from a single fire. 12 chambers. They're using principles of thermal mass and radiant heating, the same principles we use today in high-efficiency building design. Store heat in massive stone structures during the day, release it slowly at night. Create networks of channels that distribute warmth evenly throughout a structure. Dame Catherine Day. Montfort, 1292, creates the first underground aqueduct system. Fresh spring water, flowing through lead pipes insulated with wool and tar to prevent freezing, bringing water directly to underground chambers in Lincoln. That's not improvisation anymore. That's sophisticated hydraulic engineering. And here's the thing. These women are doing this without the theoretical framework that male architects will eventually use to rediscover these principles. They don't have university training. They don't have the mathematical texts. They're working from observation, from experimentation, from centuries of accumulated practical knowledge passed down through those songs and manuscripts and hands-on training. But it's not just the engineering that's remarkable. It's the social structures that develop in these underground queendoms. Beneath Avignon, beneath the papal city itself, women establish courts that operate on completely different principles than the masculine world, above ground. The Council of 12 always consists of women over 40 who've successfully built and managed underground shelters. They arbitrate disputes, they allocate resources, and they base their decisions on contribution rather than birth. Read that again. Contribution rather than birth. In medieval Europe, where your entire life is supposed to be determined by whether you were born noble or common, these underground spaces are experimenting with meritocracy. The winter laws of 1310 get carved into limestone walls 70 feet below the papal palace. And the first law establishes something revolutionary. Any woman who can dig her own chamber earns the right to trade independently, own property, and pass her holdings to her daughters without male oversight. Do you understand what that means? In the world above, women are property. Their marriages are contracts between men. Their inheritances go to sons. Their business dealings require male guardians. But down here, in these underground queendoms, different rules apply. Build a chamber, prove you can maintain it, and you've earned independence. The underground markets become exchanges, not just for goods, but for knowledge. Medical techniques learned from Jewish and Muslim refugees who need to hide from persecution. Mathematical principles brought by Byzantine scholars fleeing Constantinople. Chemical knowledge from alchemists who find female students more receptive to their teaching because women aren't as invested in the academic gatekeeping of the universities. These spaces become hubs of intellectual exchange, happening in parallel to and invisible from the official medieval academic world. While universities are excluding women and Jews and anyone else who doesn't fit their narrow criteria, the underground markets are bringing together exactly those excluded voices. The knowledge that's getting suppressed or ignored above ground is being preserved and developed below. And it all works. For a century, from 1250 to 1350, this entire parallel world thrives. The underground queendoms are at their peak of power and sophistication. Women are exercising real economic and social power, creating spaces of relative freedom within one of the most hierarchical and restrictive societies in human history. The architecture is magnificent. The engineering is brilliant. The social experimentation is genuinely revolutionary. And then, almost overnight, it all starts to collapse. February 3rd, 1348. Remember that date, because that's when everything changes. 2,000 people descend on Avignon's underground sanctuary. 2,000. The system was designed for 500. It's been working beautifully for generations, but it's designed for 500 people maximum. And now, in the space of a few hours, 2,000 plague refugees are trying to cram themselves into chambers and tunnels built for 1/4 that number. They're fleeing the Black Death. And you can understand why they're coming underground, right? Up on the surface, a third of Europe is dying. The plague is spreading through cities like wildfire. People are desperate. They've heard stories about the underground sanctuaries where women have survived sieges and wars and famines. Surely, they think, surely these spaces can save us from the plague too. But underground spaces don't work that way. You can't just scale them up on demand. The ventilation systems, the structural supports, the sanitation, everything is calibrated for a specific capacity. Exceed that capacity, and the whole system breaks down. The panic starts fast. Too many people in too small a space, all of them carrying the terror of the plague in their minds. Someone pushes, someone falls. The wooden platforms that connect different levels, platforms that have held steady for decades, suddenly they're supporting weight they were never designed to bear, and they collapse. The sound must have been apocalyptic. Wood splintering, people screaming, the crash as hundreds of bodies fall through multiple levels into the deepest chambers. When it's over, 417 people are dead, crushed, suffocated, buried in the wreckage of what was supposed to be their salvation. The survivors spread tales of underground hellscapes, of spaces that promised safety but delivered death, of chambers that collapsed under the weight of human desperation. And those stories transform everything. Almost overnight, women's shelters go from refuges to objects of fear in the popular imagination. The earth isn't a sanctuary anymore. It's a trap. It's where demons dwell. But here's the really devastating part. The Black Death doesn't just kill millions of people. It kills entire lineages of knowledge keepers. Remember how this whole tradition worked. It was oral transmission. Songs, hands-on apprenticeship, master builders training the next generation through years of direct observation and practice. When a third of Europe dies, you lose entire chains of transmission. The woman who knew the advanced ventilation techniques dies without finishing her apprentice's training. The network of merchant women who managed the underground markets, 3 of every 5 are gone. The songs that encoded crucial information get sung by fewer and fewer people until nobody remembers all the verses anymore. The mathematics of labor that made this all possible completely fall apart. Before the plague, a village of 200 could mobilize 40 women for winter digging projects. That's sustainable. That's enough hands to maintain existing shelters and build new ones. After the plague, that village has 60 souls left. 60. They're struggling to plant enough crops to survive. They're struggling to maintain the basic infrastructure of daily life. The idea of undertaking massive underground construction projects? Impossible. The existing shelters start deteriorating. Without constant maintenance, without understanding how to manage water infiltration and structural stresses, chambers that stood for generations begin to fail. And each failure reinforces the narrative that these spaces are cursed, dangerous, demonic. And then gunpowder arrives. Between 1350 and 1400, warfare transforms, and underground shelters, which used to be the ultimate defensive position, become death traps. A single barrel of gunpowder placed correctly can collapse tunnels that took decades to build. The Siege of Orleans in 1428 demonstrates this with brutal clarity. English sappers destroy French underground shelters with explosive charges, killing everyone inside. The explosions don't just collapse the immediate area, they trigger cave-ins throughout connected chambers, bringing down entire networks in cascading failures. Military thinking shifts. Underground fortifications become liabilities rather than assets. Any defensive position that can be destroyed with a single explosive charge isn't worth the massive labor investment required to build it. So within 80 years of the Avignon collapse, the practical reasons for maintaining these underground networks have largely evaporated. The skilled builders are dead, the labor pool is depleted, the military advantage has reversed, and the cultural narrative has shifted from "the earth protects us" to "the earth buries us." But even as the great tradition dies, a few remarkable women try to preserve what they can. Dame Elizabeth Woodville, working between 1470 and 1492, creates what will be the last great manual of underground construction. She hides it within a book of hours, just like Mother Constance did 400 years earlier, encoding practical engineering knowledge in painted borders and illuminated margins. Mathematical formulae disguised as decorative scrollwork, engineering diagrams hidden in representations of biblical scenes. She trains 7 apprentices in the old ways, 7 women who learn the songs, who learn to read soil, who understand ventilation and drainage and load-bearing structures. But the world they're training for doesn't exist anymore. The Renaissance has arrived with its emphasis on classical architecture, on buildings that soar upward, on public displays of wealth and power. Building underground, hiding your architectural achievements where nobody can see them, strikes Renaissance sensibilities as literally backwards. The witch trials make everything worse, because women with specialized technical knowledge, women who understand mathematics and engineering, women who know how to do things that most people consider impossible, they're exactly the kind of women who get accused of witchcraft. In Bamberg, between 1430 and 1440, 17 women are burned for possessing demonic knowledge of underground construction. Think about what that means. Technical expertise that was celebrated and sought after in 1250 is being treated as evidence of diabolical pacts in 1430. The knowledge hasn't changed. The cultural context has. The last documented traditional shelter is sealed beneath Wartburg Castle in 1487. When Renaissance scholars break into it in 1512, they find the accumulated tools of 10 generations. Iron spades worn smooth by countless hands, the metal thinned from decades or centuries of use. Measuring cords marked with knots that encode mathematical principles, but nobody knows how to read them anymore. Limestone walls covered with carved instructions, diagrams, annotations, an entire technical manual carved in stone, and the scholars looking at it dismiss it as primitive decoration. They think it's a root cellar. That's what they write in their journals. A primitive root cellar, perhaps used by local peasants for storage. They completely miss the sophisticated engineering. They can't recognize the self-ventilating design, the temperature control systems, the mathematical precision of the structural calculations. It doesn't fit their expectations of what medieval people, especially medieval women, could achieve. So they literally cannot see it. The knowledge doesn't vanish instantly, though. It fades. Like autumn into winter, like twilight into night, the oral traditions persist the longest, as they always do. They stop being technical manuals and become fairy tales. stories about underground kingdoms ruled by wise queens, songs about women who could speak to the earth itself and make it obey, place names that hint at what used to be there: Frauengrube, Women's Pit, Jungfernkeller, Maiden's Cellar. By 1500, the transformation is complete. What was practical knowledge has become myth. What was sophisticated engineering has become folktale. The greatest architectural tradition in medieval women's history has disappeared into legend, leaving only shadows in folklore and strange hollows in the earth where entire communities once thrived. And here's what haunts me about this story. We almost lost it completely. If not for those encoded manuscripts, those persistent place names, those archaeological discoveries of chambers and tunnels that make no sense according to the official history, if not for those fragments, we would never know that this happened at all. An entire tradition of women's knowledge and power and architectural achievement, operating for 400 years across an entire continent, and it nearly vanished without a trace. How much else have we lost? How many other traditions, other achievements, other ways of understanding the world disappeared because they weren't documented by the people who wrote the official chronicles? The underground queendoms are gone. The women who built them are gone. The songs that encoded their knowledge are mostly forgotten, but the earth remembers. The chambers are still there, buried beneath cities and castles and farmland. The tunnels still wind through the darkness. The ventilation shafts still catch the wind, even though nobody's breathing the air they circulate anymore. And maybe, just maybe, their legacy isn't entirely lost. Because every time an archaeologist finds an inexplicable underground structure, every time someone excavating a basement discovers chambers that aren't on any map, every time a construction crew hits a tunnel that nobody knew existed, we're finding pieces of this forgotten world. We're learning, very slowly, to see what the earth has been trying to show us all along, that women built kingdoms in the darkness, and those kingdoms were magnificent.